Hello, everyone. I am Anirudh, and I have with me today Iqbal Malhotra. Iqbal is a filmmaker and the best-selling author of many books on topics like geopolitics and contemporary history. Welcome to Blue One Ink today, Iqbal.
Thank you, Anirudh.
Um, One of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you and was very keen that you give us some clarity on what is happening to the global geopolitics from 24th Feb 20, last year, and it getting a momentum of its own from on 7th of October this year, when Hamas invaded Israeli territory and almost massacred 1,400 of those people. For a layperson like us, this just doesn't make sense. So we have absolutely no clue why it happened. Why would somebody like Hamas do what it has done? And if you can throw some light on that, and what is happening now that 30 days or almost a month has gone, what is happening in Gaza area, and how do you think this is going to end if there is an end game?
Well, on the 24th of February last year, the Russians invaded Ukraine, and everybody thought that they would wrap it all up in about 3 or 4 days, and they would be eating caviar and drinking champagne in Kiev.
That didn't happen.
It didn't happen, and the myth of the Russian army was shattered, and it became it sort of degenerated into a war of attrition. And the world thought that this war was one war was enough, and it had the possibilities of spilling over into other countries as well. And it became a proxy war between the Americans, who were using Ukraine to fight the Soviets. I mean, not the Soviets, but the Russians. Now, suddenly on the 7th of October, when everything was silent, this new thing erupted uh, in Gaza and in Israel, when the Hamas attacked and killed 1,400, almost 1,400 Israelis, innocent victims who were not involved in any way against the Hamas or against the Palestinians. So obviously there was going to be retaliation. Now let's put this into perspective, because these are two events. They started off as separate events, but now they are joined together in one umbilical cord. Now I'll explain to you. Let's look at the event of 7th of October, which is more recent. Now, the reason why Hamas attacked Israel and killed those 1,400 innocent Israelis to set the ball rolling, and then there was massive Israeli retaliation, no one has actually outlined the reason as to why did the Hamas go into a self-destruct mode, because their command and control systems have been destroyed, their weapons have been captured, 10,000 Palestinians have been killed, the infrastructure has been smashed, and Israel today has succeeded in creating a corridor, cutting off Gaza into two parts. The head, which is northern Gaza. If we can shift to a map of northern Gaza, the second map in this. Yeah, if you can just focus on it. Now, this map, the Israelis in this area have thrust forward, and they have reached the Mediterranean Sea. So effectively, Gaza has been cut into two parts. This is like a demilitarized zone, which is or a sanitized corridor that keeps these two parts of Gaza apart. Now, all the Hamas inlets into Israel through their tunnel system were in North Gaza, around from Gaza city going into Israel this side. South Gaza actually was an area to receive weapons that were coming from Iran through the tunnel system into Gaza. So the weapons coming in was probably tolerated by the Israelis, but the attacks have all been focused from Gaza city and this area. So the Israelis are now destroying the infrastructure of Gaza city and this area and the command and control systems of the Hamas. And my guess is that they're going to completely sanitize this area, and they asked the population to move, and now people are moving because all of them didn't move. And for example, if there were 2.1 million Palestinians in Gaza, Out of that, if you say that maybe there were 100,000 Hamas activist fighters, and each of those people had families. So there may be 3 or 4 persons to a family. So you have about 500,000 or 25% of the population was actively hostile. Those guys never left this area because they were being used as human shields against the Israelis. And the deaths of the people that have taken place are actually largely the deaths of the Hamas family members, rather than other random Palestinians who were deliberately kept there despite the Israeli warnings, so that the world opinion would focus on the fact that the Palestinians were being killed. But today everybody's forgotten that the Israelis were killed first,
Right.
which is why this happened. So why did the Palestinians, and rather why did Hamas actually go into this self-destruct mode?
It's almost suicide, committing.
What did they get out of it?
Right.
So let's go back to the bigger picture. By about April this year, after the port of Haifa had been a large interest in the container terminal, 70% had been acquired by an Indian corporate in January. After that, the whole concept of the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor began to take shape. And it was no longer a paper project, but it began to become a reality. And basically, that project provided for shipping from India to come up to Jebel Ali in Dubai, and from Jebel Ali to go by train all the way to Haifa. And for this, there was an accord between Saudi Arabia and Israel, brokered by the Americans, which is part of the Abraham Accords. And that brought this whole region into a whole new economic awakening. Now, the IMEC corridor was the biggest threat to China, because China's got the Belt and Road Initiative, in which they've invested almost $1 trillion in the third world. And they did not want this to happen because also these political alignments were contrary to their desire. So they had to destroy G20 and they had to destroy IMEC, because without it, it wouldn't work. Correct. So they figured out that, look, let's have a 2-stage plan. The first stage of the plan is to destroy G20 and destroy India's credibility with the West. So in order to do that, they picked up a very interesting way. Somebody, maybe Indian intelligence, since the latter half of 2022, was bumping off or assassinating terrorists in Pakistan who were actively involved in terrorist actions against India.
Right.
And 2 interesting characters were assassinated in February this year.
Right.
One was a man called Ejaz Angar, who was a Kashmiri, who masterminded the killing of about 23 Sikhs in a Gurdwara in Kabul.
Right.
And the second was a man called Basharat Ahmad Peer, who was a Hizbul Mujahideen activist, who was the main person who pushed the terrorists across the border into India. Now, this Basharat Ahmad was assassinated in Rawalpindi, and this Ejaz Angar was assassinated in the somewhere in Afghanistan.
Right.
Now, it is believed, and no trail was found. It is believed that these were contract killings. There are a lot of Afghan intelligence officials who dissipated into the sunset when Kabul fell a few years ago, and they're available. So it was believed that these were actually carried out by those guys, but maybe India had a hand in it.
Right.
So what happened is that they hit upon an interesting plan that let us now create a false flag operation which will implicate India further.
Mm-hmm.
And to that effect, they sacrificed one Khalistani terrorist who had taken refuge in Lahore, Paramjit Singh Panwar.
Correct.
And he was assassinated by 2 fellows or 3 fellows. One was driving a car in Lahore on the 6th of May this year.
This was false flag.
This was, my view is that this was a false flag because he was a Pakistani asset.
Correct. Why would
why would they kill their own asset unless they had a purpose that they needed to sacrifice him and pin the killings on India?
Right.
So they created this third link after the killings of those 2 fellows in the Peer in Rawalpindi and the one in Afghanistan. And they created a pattern. Now, we come to the killing of Mr. Nijjar in uh, June in Canada. Now, Mr. Nijjar was a Khalistani who was opposed to a chap called Ripudaman Malik, who was involved in the Kanishka blast.
Correct.
And this Ripudaman Malik became a pro-India guy. And there was a fierce competition because they control a lot of monetary assets as well between the two of them. And Malik was killed, I think, in 2022. And the onus of killing him fell upon, the suspicion, the finger of suspicion fell upon Nijjar, though nothing could be proved.
Proven.
So they said that, look, this was Nijjar had killed Malik. Malik was an asset of the Indian government. Therefore, now killing Nijjar would be very easy to pin this on the Indian government and say that the Indians had killed Nijjar. And this would then inflame passions in Canada because Trudeau's government is supported by 25 MPs. It's a minority government of the National Democratic Party, which is run by Jimmy Dhaliwal.
Right.
Now, Jimmy Dhaliwal is an avowed Khalistani, and he's also got ties with China. And the Chinese have been also interfering in Canadian politics, and we have also been interfering in Canadian politics. That's a given. We can't deny that fact. But the fact is that I don't think that we killed this guy and Nijjar, because his hit was then some Chinese bloggers confirmed that there was a Chinese Ministry of State Security official who sanctioned the hit in Seattle. And he was killed so that Trudeau would raise a row, and that row would be raised in Delhi during the G20, and the G20 would collapse and the IMEC would be stillborn.
Right.
Now, Mr. Biden preempted that and told Trudeau that, look, take it easy.
Okay.
Take a chill pill first for the time being. When you go back home, then you can
do whatever.
And shout.
Yeah.
So that's what he did. So IMEC then became a reality, and the next IMEC meeting was set for November this year, which we are in now.
Right.
Meanwhile, the Chinese said, now this is, we've lost the momentum, so let's put Plan B into action. And Plan B was to get the Hamas to attack Israel so that this whole area would blow up. And interestingly, the Hamas are all Sunnis.
Right.
But they are being funded by Iran, which is Shia. It's a non-state actor of Iran. Now, the killing of Sunnis in Gaza brought opprobrium by the Saudis because they protested and they said they cannot accept this fact. And the Saudi clerics came down heavily on Prince Mohammed bin Sultan, that how can you tolerate this? You break off your ties with Israel. So now the IMEC, which was going to go from Jebel Ali, and the ships would come from India to Jebel Ali, and then from Jebel Ali there'd be a railway track all the way through to Haifa.
Right.
That for the time being is all over now.
Correct.
Because the Abraham Accords have also failed. Everything has failed because of what has happened in Gaza. So now the question is that who gained from this? The Chinese gained. And what did the poor Palestinians get? Nothing. Now there's also talk, of course, there's this narrative being spun that the Americans and the Israelis are setting up the process to build this Ben Gurion Canal, which will go from the port of Eilat over here. It will be a parallel Suez Canal, because the Suez Canal was built in the 19th century and it's only possible for one ship at a time to go through it. So there's a big waiting period. But this Ben Gurion Canal would go from Eilat all the way up somewhere here, and it would end up in northern Gaza. So the new narrative is that the whole thing has happened because the Americans and the Israelis want to build this Ben Gurion Canal, which they've been planning to build for the last 70 years, but they've done nothing about it because it's very difficult to blast the desert and build another canal like the Suez or the Panama Canal over here.
Right.
So a simpler way, of course, would be for shipping to come, instead of going left through the Red Sea, would go up to the Gulf of Aqaba, and from Eilat, there would be a train to take it to Haifa. So this is an alternative IMEC, but it again is not an efficient option, because the fact is that this route from Jebel Ali to Haifa by train would shave off at least a fortnight in travel time for the container vessels and the containers to go through to Europe. But this will probably just save time in terms of the the traffic that is held up for the
Suez.
transit through the Suez.
Right.
So now we are in a situation where this war is going to go on, and nobody has the guts to enter it as of now because of the kind of retaliation that the Israelis has heaped upon Gaza. So the non-state actors of the Iranians are the Houthis over here, down here in Yemen. They are Hezbollah in Lebanon, and they are Hamas, which is now getting a beating in Gaza. Now, the Iranian arms were coming from Bandar Abbas all the way to Aden, and from Aden they were transshipped by land to the circuitous route to the Egyptian Gaza border, where through the system of tunnels they were transferred into Gaza.
Gaza.
Now they could not go any other way because you cannot. This whole area is very heavily policed and monitored by the Americans, by the French, by the Japanese, by the Chinese, by the Indians. All of us are there, and there's no way to reach Gaza through Israel. You can either reach Gaza through Egypt,
Correct.
over here, through the Rafah crossing, that side, the tunnels, or you can reach it through the sea.
Right.
So effectively today, the Israelis have now cut off Gaza from the world. They've cut off Gaza from Iran, and I don't think the weapons will be replenished of the Hamas. So Hamas, in fact, is dying, is being strangled, and is dying a slow death, a fast death to begin with in northern Gaza, but a slow death in southern Gaza. So now the question is, what will happen? Will the population, because the whole issue is that even in Israel, they are not willing to accept the two-nation theory. The two-nation theory is that there's a nation of Palestinians and a nation of Jews.
Right.
Now the Orthodox Jews, there are 13% of Orthodox Jews in Israel today, and they are procreating at a faster rate than the non-Orthodox Jews. An Orthodox Jewish mother gives 7 to 8 babies, whereas the normal, regular Jewish mother doesn't give so many babies today. So their birth rate is not as rapid as the birth rate of the Orthodox Jews, and they don't want a Palestine. They want a greater Israel. And the greater Israel would include the West Bank of Jordan,
Yeah, of course.
and Gaza and the Golan Heights. Now, that would then effectively absorb 7 million Arabs into Israel, which has only got 9.3 million Jews. So you are almost creating a situation where you will be in a country of apartheid if you don't give them, they'll be about 40-45%
Right.
if you don't give them equal rights. So this greater Israel is a threat to the modern Israelis, because this whole concept, because this is going to create further problems. So the Palestinians don't want to give up Gaza.
Right.
They want Israel, the Jews, to vacate Israel, and they're very clear on that. And the Orthodox Jews don't want to give up the West Bank. They want a greater Israel. So this is this tussle. Now, this has been going on since the Balfour Declaration of 1917. And in fact, the Germans, the Nazis, exported 100,000 Jews to Palestine between 1933 and 1938, over 5 years, and they allowed the Jews to convert their wealth into German goods. And it was German goods and German machinery and German agricultural implements and everything else that laid the basis for the state of Israel.
That's fascinating.
So it's a very complicated story. But now the Chinese have stepped in, and the Chinese are supporting the Russians in Ukraine against the Americans.
Right.
And the Chinese are supporting the Iranians, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis in the Middle East against the Israelis and the Americans.
Right.
So that's what the equation is. So you've now got two theaters of war that are joined together by a common thread, which is being yanked or pulled or manipulated from Beijing.
So what about the third theater, which is Northeast Ladakh, and where does India come into this picture? Because This is a very difficult world, as I can see, especially
Yeah.
for India and at this stage. Um, h- how do we survive this, or how do we tackle all this? Seems to be Chinese design from the beginning. And I'm not sure whether Ukraine-Russian war had any support from China, but it definitely they have started supporting. They're getting North Koreans to supply shells to the Russian, if I'm not mistaken. Where does India come in, and how is India supposed to tackle this? Because otherwise, we'll get relegated to history once again.
See, what people don't realize is that we've got several million Indian expatriates working in the Middle East, right? Now, those people are vulnerable, and also they are vulnerable to nationalistic sentiments arising in the Middle East against them. And they are also vulnerable because they remit close to $100 billion a year in remittances. So they're a very vital resource for our economy, and there are people. So how do you actually balance the support for Israel and look after the interests of these people? And after all our oil comes from the Middle East. What are we going to do? So the question is that you've got to make a difference between Netanyahu and the state of Israel. So you cannot, I mean, outline your support only for Netanyahu. Netanyahu may come, he may be there today, he won't be there tomorrow. But the state of Israel is the state with which we have relations with.
Right.
So we have to actually build our ties publicly with the saner elements in the state of Israel rather than Mr. Netanyahu,
Okay.
whom 83% of Israelis have rejected
Right.
and who ignored the advice of the intelligence community and their concern that, look, the Hamas is doing military exercises and they're going to create a problem, and he ignored it.
So that's political failure, not intelligence
No,
failure.
it's not an intelligence failure, it's a political failure. Whether it's a deliberate or it's a careless political failure, but it is a political failure, not an intelligence failure. So we are in a tough position with regard to our interests in the Middle East. How we deal with it in this election year is going to be a reflection of the statesman-like capabilities that we have. We have to figure out how this is going to be done. Is anyone even going to pay attention to this? Because I think India has gone silent over the last month and has not made any statements, and it's probably very wise not to say anything till you know what is going to happen and how the dust is going to settle, because it's a dynamic chessboard. You never know which trigger-happy Hezbollah commander will fire a missile against the Israelis, and the Hezbollah will then be drawn into the war, and there'll be further killing, further destruction. Israelis have already attacked Damascus airport and Aleppo airport so that no Iranian air transportation corridors can be established to provide weapons to the Hezbollah and then trickle down to Hamas.
Hamas.
So it's a now it's a what was called a आर पार की लड़ाई in Hindi, or it's called an apocalyptic war, where the Israelis are not going to leave the Iranians alone. They will definitely destroy their oil assets because that is what will hurt them the most. And if they decide to destroy their oil assets because Iran is behind this as a proxy of China,
China.
what will be the retaliation? It's very difficult. The game theory and war games have to determine what will be the final outcome. Nobody knows. And as far as northern Ladakh, eastern Ladakh goes, my view is that the Chinese look at Ladakh as a very vital resource for water, fresh water, because the four rivers, the Nubra, the Shyok, the Changchemo, and the Galwan, all feed into the Indus system. And on the upper Indus, in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, the Chinese are completing two dams, the Diamer Basha Dam and the Bunji Dam, at a cost of almost $28 billion.
Huge dams they would be.
Yes, sir. And these two dams are going to store water in reservoirs almost 50 kilometers long. They are man-made lakes that are being created by the Chinese in the Karakorams. And these dams are going to generate 40 gigawatt hours of electricity.
That's a lot of power.
Now, the installed capacity of power in Pakistan is 32 gigawatt hours. their consumption is 22 gigawatt hours.
Surplus,
Where
huh?
is this 40 going? It's not going to Pakistan. They've already laid the pylons and the cables to pump this electricity into Xinjiang, because northern China has very little water. It has no electricity, very little electricity, not no, but very little electricity. And the Chinese semiconductor industry has been shifted to southern Xinjiang because of the availability of water and electricity. Because the microchip industry requires sand, water, and electricity. Sand you have in abundance in the Taklamakan desert.
Right.
Water is coming from
Those two reservoirs.
from those reservoirs, and the electricity is being generated by the Daimar Basha Dam and the Bunji Dam. So the Chinese, because of global warming and glacial melt, want to take advantage of the surge of water that is going to otherwise be dissipated in the floodplains of Ladakh,
Right.
because the whole valley will get flooded if the water surges. We've been seeing floods already in the
Yes.
Himalayas.
Yes.
So they want to capture that, and with the use of modern hydrographic technology. So how will they do that if they don't control the land? And it is very difficult to actually uh, conquer Ladakh, because there is a Ladakh range that divides it into northern and southern Ladakh.
Mm-hmm.
The Ladakh range is well defended by us, but they have their sights on it. So the fact of the matter is that they thought it would be a cakewalk to get into Ladakh, because India would offer no resistance.
Talking about 2020 Galwan or around that area,
Yes,
June,
yes,
April,
because
May.
their plan to build these dams started in about 2013-14,
Right.
and they're way into completion. So why would they build those dams, and why would they now institutionalize their presence in eastern Ladakh if they hadn't got their sights on the western Ladakh?
Right.
So they're not parking 60,000 troops there. I mean, now that LOC and the LAC has become one active border from near Jammu all the way down up to Barahoti in Uttarakhand. That's one big active border where we've also got 50-60,000 troops actively facing the Chinese. So it's not a nice position for either country to be in, but they have their own compulsions because they're acquisitive, and they want to achieve their end result one way or the other.
So this would be assertion of their supremacy over the United States or the Western world in some sense.
Yes, because we are part of that alliance, the Quad.
Right.
We are part of the Quad. They also tried to break the Quad with that attack on Niger, because when Trudeau attacked us and then everybody here retaliated and the press attacked America, America is not our enemy. America is not even a friend, but America is a friend when it needs you. And today we have more in common with America and Britain and Canada than we have with China or Russia. After all, we have NRIs and people of Indian origin in the political system in America,
Correct.
in Britain, in Canada. I mean, Canada is run by Punjabis.
Right.
So the fact of the matter is that when we have such a lot of affinity and we have familial ties with them, why would we want to abandon our ties with them and extend ties with the Chinese? What do we have in China? What NRI politician is there in China?
And Chinese hate us, from whatever I understand with our conversation just before we started recording. So Chinese have historical hatred for this part of the world. So they are all, in many ways, they're also taking revenge, as you were elaborating.
Yes, because we were responsible with the British to make them into a nation of addicts, as we say in Hindi, Havimchis.
Right.
So we made them into addicts, and from 1840 till almost 1928-29, opium was going from India to China, and silver was coming from China into India. So they had a negative balance of trade with us. Now they're taking revenge on us, and we have a negative balance of trade with them.
It's fascinating, Iqbal. So before we wind up today's session, I think we have gone on long enough. How would you want, or how do you see India being able to tackle the pulls and pressures of how to deal with Russia on one end, because we can very clearly see that there are tensions coming in. Although we are buying a lot of oil from there, then the tensions with the West, especially with the Canada imbroglio going on, and then China sitting on our head in whether it is Ladakh or whether it is Arunachal Pradesh. Can you just sum this up for our viewers? How do you think this can be balanced in a such way that we come out net positive rather than lose?
Let's take it one at a time. Let's look at the Russian thing. When the Ukrainian war started and the sanctions were imposed on Russia, the Russian Foreign Minister, Mr. Lavrov, came to India, I think it was in April 2022. And he was negotiating with us to sell us oil.
Right.
Now, the Russian oil comes from the ground where there's the permafrost. Now, when you dig an oil well in the permafrost, if you stop pumping oil, that oil well is going to seize up. So you'll have to dig a fresh well all over again if you cease production in that well. And the Russian economy was in 2022 not in the greatest of health. They couldn't afford unemployment and they couldn't afford to shut down their oil wells. Now, the cost of extraction of 1 barrel of oil out of the permafrost in Russia was $44 a barrel. In April 2022, the price of oil was $78 a barrel.
Right.
Now, we heard press reports that we had great skill and acumen and we negotiated the price down to $60 a barrel. But actually, the price negotiated, it was down to $51 a barrel. The Russians sold us oil at $51 a barrel, taking almost giving almost one-third discount to us. So they were only earning $7 a barrel.
Right.
Now, they have $60 billion worth of rupees, which are lying with them utterly useless. And the mechanism to actually utilize those rupees is not working. And so the first real transaction is being executed now when the Russians are going to buy 20 cargo vessels from Goa Shipyards Limited, which will take some time in building them and delivering them to the Russians.
As a barter.
No, to use those rupees to pay for it. Now, this is the irony of it, that at one time we were buying ships from the Russians, now they are buying ships from us. But the fact of the matter is that they are very, very angry in Russia. Because, yes, because we have sitting, the $60 billion worth of rupees are not being utilized. And they got a very raw deal from us. So they are not very friendly with us anymore. We may wave this flag of friendship, but they are very angry because, they only made $7 a barrel in that oil deal. That's all. And the advantage is that they kept the wells running.
Right.
And they kept, and the West was very happy because they had imposed the price bans and they said that below $60 a barrel, you cannot sell the oil. But they didn't want the oil supply to dry up because that would have other repercussions on inflation.
Right.
So they actually permitted us to carry on and supply the end products, the downstream products to the Europeans. Now, to come to China, you see, China, the problem is that the Chinese perceive that they are a kingdom which is the middle kingdom between heaven and earth. And the Chinese emperor today, who is Xi Jinping, is the representative of God and the middle kingdom who looks down at all of us lesser mortals on the planet Earth. So when you view other people with contempt and you do not like India because the Indian army was in China from 1840 to 1939, Indian policemen ran 9 to 11 Chinese cities till 1948.
Wow.
And India helped the British supply them with opium. And that opium money came to India. And the tea industry also was shifted from China to India. So they have a very historical hatred against us. I don't think that, despite all these great stories of the brave Dr. Kotnis and so on and so forth, the Chinese don't like us. And I don't think that there can be any friendship. We've had prime ministers from Mr. Nehru to Mr. Modi trying to be friendly with China.
It's never worked.
But they never worked. And it's never going to work. So you can forget about it. We have great relationship with the Japanese. We have a great relationship with America. We have a great relationship with the Koreans. We need to build up our ties with these countries to counter poise the Chinese.
That makes a lot of sense, and that it clarifies a lot of issues that I've had in my mind. So before we wind up, Iqbal, today, would you be kind enough to tell us what are you working on now, since you write? You write a lot on, especially on these interesting topics, and whatever we discussed today, in my personal opinion, it can become a fantastic book. But what are you working on?
I am right now completing my new film called Nuclear Ninjas, the China, Pakistan, North Korea axis. It's the story of how the Chinese helped the North Koreans build their ballistic missile program, and the Pakistanis their uranium enrichment program to build the bomb, and then got the Pakistanis to share the technology or swap it for the bomb with the North Koreans, and for the North Koreans to swap the ballistic missile technology with the Pakistanis.
Pakistan.
So that's my new film. It's going to come out this month, and I'll be sending it to my distributor in America for distribution in all over the world.
So you touched upon this topic in your last book, if I'm
Yes.
not mistaken. There are very interesting anecdotes on how the bombs got funded in Pakistan through
Yes.
all these routes, and how China helped. So what else are you planning on writing something?
I am now writing also the sequel to my last book, which was a story of the Pakistani bomb from 1964 to 2004. And now the story will take off from 2004 to 2021 with the fall of Kabul.
Okay, that should be a very interesting book, and we look forward to it. Thank you very much for coming over today, Iqbal. It's been a pleasure and an honor, and hopefully we will meet again and discuss some other topic at
Thank
some
you,
other point
Anirudh,
of time.
and
Thank
it
you
was
so
a
much.
pleasure being here with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.